Is it? We can certainly see it. Yeah, we can. That's all. Yeah.
We started.
Okay, thank you very much. So welcome to this meeting of the Licensing and Public Protection Committee for Birmingham City Council on Wednesday, 8th of September 2021. I advise the meeting to note that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, the member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I think I have apologies from Councillor Martin Wells today. Any other apologies?
No, Nicky Brennan.
Okay, Councillor Brennan. Okay, thank you very much. Other colleagues, I have the sad duty to report to the committee the death of Councillor Neil Eustace, a serving member of the committee. And as colleagues who have long service on the council will know, Councillor Eustace was a former chair of this committee from 2004 to 12. And indeed a member of the Public Protection Committee, as it was called at that stage, from 1999 to 2012. He was a continuously serving member indeed until his recent death for another 9 years. And while there will be full tributes, obviously, to Councillor Eustace at the main council meeting, I think it's quite right that we should mark his passing here as a former chair and as a long-serving member of this committee today. So will you join me, please, in a minute's silence to remember the work and life and service to the community of Councillor Eustace. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Moving on to the minutes, I confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June 2021. I'm never sure whether you actually want me to physically sign these days, given the disruption of the COVID and so on. What do you want me to do?
Well, we can't really sign.
That's all right. But we've obviously noted them at the meeting and equally online. Okay, so thank you for that. So item 5 is the outturn report, the financial report for the committee. By the way, can I just note, we don't have our name tags. I should have said that I'm Councillor Phil Davis. I'm just thinking about the public and the live stream. So if you speak, could you just say who you are before you speak? That will assist, obviously, anybody who's looking. So thank you for that. So I'd like to go to David Jones, the assistant on the financial report.
Okay, good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Jones, I'm the Finance Manager for this directorate. It's good to see you all in person. So the Cabinet has approved, these are the first 2 financial reports approved today, so it's the outturn for 2021 financial year. So the Cabinet has approved the overall outturn on the 29th of June. The external audit of those accounts is still underway, and I expect it to be another month before the auditor can finish report. I'll just go through this report in the usual order. So I'll talk about the budget, the outturn, the grants, and then finally the reserves. So the budget is set out in table 2, top of page 3 of the report. I previously mentioned the centralisation and moving of the AD budget, so 6.167 million is the budget that was reported to you last time. In the final quarter of last financial year, more budget was added for the apprenticeship levy, so that's something your services have already paid, just a budget to meet that pressure. Also, there's additional budget for the pay award. We had originally budgeted at 2.5%, but during last financial year, the pay award was agreed at 2.75%. So again, it's just a small additional bit of budget there, and again, it's already something the services are paying for, so it neutralises that pressure. Therefore, the budget increased to 6.258 million at the year end. Further down on that same page, you've got the net spend for the year, which was just over 7 million, 7.841 million. And you can see that in paragraph 5.5. However, over 1 million of that, if you look at the table, you can see in column 1, 1,053,000 of that related to the cost of your COVID responses. So the business as usual spend was 5.9 million. And if you compare that to the budget I've just told you, which is 6.258, then you get that £270,000 underspend. And you can see that in column 2 of that table. So that underspend is spread over most service areas, except licensing. And we've discussed this before. The licensing position is due to how the budget is reported corporately. Some of that budget has been centralised. So the budget that's presented is for the management of the service really. The actuals are treated correctly as a ring fence, and we've shown this clearly in appendix 2 of the report, just to give you reassurance that ring fence is being adhered to. For variations in the other service areas, it's mainly environmental health. So environmental health finished the year better off. It's staff that were working on COVID responses, so their costs were recharged there. Also, the litter patrols and therefore the unbudgeted income from FPNs was restarted earlier during the financial year. Plus, there was some other income as well from the increased use of food export certificates. So just along on page 5. Just to talk about grants, so the illegal money lending, there was a big underspending in the grant there. However, that was actually flagged up quite early on in the financial year. With the HM Treasury who fund this particular programme, they agreed for that to be carried forward, that underspend, for use in the current financial year, 2022. Finally then, the reserves. We've just got one big concern in licensing. So if the fees were not changed last financial year, we didn't want to hit local businesses during the pandemic. It was a difficult year for a lot of local businesses. So that wasn't changed last year. There's a deficit there that does need to be addressed in the current financial year. Just so to summarise, the budget increased to 6.258 million. Services did overspend this, but that was because of COVID, and excluding the COVID elements is actually a small underspend. And then there's the issue of the licensing reserves. We do need that to be addressed in the current financial year. So I hope that was okay. It's a quick run through. It's a long way after the financial year end. We did need to get all the governance timelines in order. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I'll have there's obviously some questions. David, do you want to deal with the monitoring report as well? Because I think obviously they mesh in the usual way, and I'll ask the previous questions.
Yeah, okay.
Can you do that?
Thank you.
So that's item 6 as well, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. So the second report is for the current financial year, and this is for the first quarter, period from April to the end of June. So these figures are part of the Cabinet report on the 27th of July. The budget has changed in the first part of the year by a net 234,000, and that's from the start of the year budget that we reported to the committee on the 10th of March. And that's mainly due to 250,000 additional to fund the increments, and that's staff moving up the pay structure. There's also adjustments for moving in of the street trading service that is newly placed in this committee's portfolio into licensing from the markets area. And we did state at the time there's still some unpicking to do. It wasn't a straight lift and shift of those services. So since that move, we've identified additional budget that that service needs, and that's been moved in. Lastly, there's a budget movement from the registry office. That's moved from there to the mortuary. The mortuary is no longer part of this committee's portfolio. And that movement was to support the CTPM programme. That's the non-invasive post-mortems. So that was a pilot in a previous financial year, and they're part of their mainstream service. I'm not sure if I said that the budget is 6.679 million pounds. Just to move down that page, so the actual net expenditure at the end of June was 2.19 million. That gives you a year-to-date variation of 399,400. And the agreed forecast for the year is at £469,000 pressure. So it's not expected to change much in the rest of the year in net terms. Of that pressure, 451 relates to the COVID response work that the services involved in delivering. So I'm just going to split that variation between COVID and non-COVID. The COVID variations, they're due to additional staff hours and different measures at the registry office, and that's a public access building. And that's probably 148,000. Plus in the coroners, we have a combination of additional coroners, additional coroners investigators, additional room hire because of social distancing during inquests, and also the cost of post-mortems as well. There's extra measures needed during post-mortems for health and safety and COVID-related stuff. Also, trading standards, they're leading on fraud investigations into business grounds as well, with some success. Again, that's additional costs due to COVID. On the non-COVID side, there's just that 18,000. That is a refund on a service level agreement we have with another local authority, and that's most probably going to be mitigated in the next quarter 2 or quarter 3. In fact, there's a lot of mitigation work underway at the moment to balance out all these pressures, not just those attributed to the COVID group. Finally, and almost finally, on the grants, so if you turn to page 5, or we look at appendix 3, the illegal money lending and the regional intelligence team, they got close to being in line with their budget. The Proceeds of Crime Act expenditure and income are very similar, so we're not expecting the final balance to change much in the rest of the year. And they have balances of over £1 million. Licensing, as I said, has a deficit of over £1 million. As mentioned in the Act report, it is something that should be addressed in the current financial year. And we recommend that at least a third of that balance is incorporated into your next fees calculation. So to summarise that report, the current position shows a net pressure, and that's mainly on the income budget. Managers are working to mitigate that. The makeup of that pressure might alter in the rest of the year, but not really in net terms. So the year-end position we're expecting to be 469,000 overall pressure, with the majority of that caused by the work that you are doing in response to COVID. So again, I hope that was useful and clear. If you do have questions, I'll do my best to answer them or if they're more complex, I'll come separately.
Okay, thank you very much, David. So, questions on both reports 5 and 6. Councillor Leddy.
It's just on 5, this one, Chairman. As we look at decision or comment 1.2, that the executive has approved the outturn report as a separate entity of the council, this committee. I think that we should be entitled to doing more than just note the report. We should be endorsing the report because we are, after all, the budget holders. It may well be that the budget becomes part of the overall council expenditure. But as the budget holders, as a committee, we should be endorsing the reports as reported by Mr. Jones.
I think that's a fair point.
Depends, as I am.
Well, no, I think you made a good point that obviously we have our responsibilities. Obviously, we operate under the executive and the council, but it is our role to make sure we're satisfied with what's been placed before the executive ultimately. So, thank you for that point. I'll note that when I move the recommendations. Any other questions from colleagues? I just had a general point really about, I think both reports are very clear about the impact of COVID. It may be impossible to answer this question, maybe it's one for the assistant director in that case. But I just wondered if we think there is any sign of the COVID costs which we've incurred, and I know a lot of them, most of them covered by government grant in many circumstances, but whether we think there's any tailing off of those costs. Can we see any reduction in COVID-related pressures?
Thank you, Sharon. Some service areas do have a tailing off. We noticed this financial year. There is, however, and I think particularly on coroners, there's ongoing pressures, there's backlogs, and there's continued need to have social distancing, and that is what causes a lot of their pressure. So we are still identifying forecasted costs through to the end of this financial year. But we'll continually seeking how that will be funded.
Chair, if I could.
Yes, please.
Mr. Jones is exactly right. So for most areas, the costs are not rising on COVID restrictions, although we are still in register office, in our own offices, maintaining restrictions, but they're not necessarily incurring additional expenditure at this time. The coroner's side, we've got about a year of jury cases that are outstanding following COVID. So that will probably take something in the order of 18 months to catch up. And we'll be significantly reliant on the new coroner's court that the Cabinet approved for purchase and refurbishment coming on stream around about November. I think apart from that, the security staff at cemeteries, they're all dealt with, but generally across my piece, there is not a lot of additional expenditure coming forward. The last remaining one is obviously the regional mortuary, which is currently being decommissioned, and we have allowed for that within the budget. So I'm not anticipating further costs to be incurred.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Locke.
I'd like to sort of point out that there could be some of the cases of COVID are rising, although the vaccination programme is going ahead very well, but we are mindful that the winter flu is possibly on the horizon, and vaccinations for that, and there seems to be a stall with vaccines as well, and getting the vaccines in and things like that. So, there could be a rise in chest-related illnesses, which could be COVID, could be flu, and that is a sort of down the road in the near to mid future. I mean, I was rambling there, but I think you know.
So we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, we know that. I just thought I'd ask that question because clearly there's been a substantial impact on the budget, although it has been well managed and supported in various ways externally. But it would be nice to think that at some point, you know, and we don't know when, we'll be back to a normal budget, except the new normal, of course, as we've been saying, is different. So we'll keep, obviously, that one under review as a committee. I think in terms of the figures I saw most recently through public health, and certainly through the email sent around by the cabinet member, Councillor Hamilton, the trend was favourable in a number of areas in terms of the overall incidence of the variant and COVID across the city, although we do know, of course, that there are areas, particularly in the city, where the vaccination level is lower, much lower than elsewhere. Yeah, we're moving in the right direction, but we're not yet seeing the financial impact.
Chair, Mark from Environmental Health. Chair, I just think we ought to record our thanks to the Director of Public Health, who's transferred quite a lot of funding to environmental health, particularly in the division, in its work against the spread of COVID. So I think it's worth just recording that as well, please.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll note that, yes. And obviously, the close working between ourselves and public health has been one of the key successes, I think, of council. And again, and we've done this on a number of committees, but I think it can't be said too often. Members I know want to record their thanks to all staff for all the hard work they've done and they continue to do in dealing with the pandemic. And, you know, we've shown, I think, local government can respond. And we don't get everything right, but we have actually been very positively as an organisation to tackling this issue in the interest of public health. Okay, well, thank you, colleagues. If there's nothing else on these two reports, so can I ask you to endorse report 5? Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay. And to note report 6. Agreed? Agreed. Right. Thank you very much. Now we are on to the annual report of environmental health and the RIT. So I know
Yes, Chair, sorry, I should have said earlier, Paul Lancaster, interim AD for regulation enforcement. Yes, if you allow Mark to start and then Tony, then you pause for questions on environmental health, and then Tony will go into the IMLT for that. Just one note, Chair, I wanted to make sure members were aware that Sir Julian Basir, who is one of the heads of service, will be late for this meeting. She's got held up on a previous call.
Okay, and I know Mark has to leave. We've got another meeting fairly imminently coming here. So, okay, so over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. This report is the second half of the annual reports that have been delivered in the last two committees in person. And this is the environmental health, and then followed by the licensing and the retain. I've never been able to do this service if there hadn't been for my 7 managers, Janet, Nick, Gary, Mark, Austin, Craft, Lisa, Vicky and Cheryl. We've had an amazing year, and I'm just going to dance through the report very, very quickly, but thank you to them, thank you to the officers, and thank you to the admin support. We've been absolutely brilliant getting us through this last year. On page 4, there's the summary table of the inspections by numbers and the work that we've done. And I think the biggest challenge that we probably have had this last year is that the food inspections were all suspended as a result of the FSA having to call a halt to that nationally. So officers haven't been going out and doing inspections on a routine basis. We have continued to do inspections where there's been a high risk identified or on complaints, but that's very much reduced. And I think the vast majority of staff are actually transferred across into COVID. And in previous years, when I've done the report, health protection has probably taken up a small paragraph, whereas this time around it's sort of featuring right up at the front. And I think very few people sort of understood that. Although we did investigations into things like food poisoning outbreaks and other outbreaks, they didn't realise that the powers were vested in local authorities and their environmental health teams to actually take on this sort of work. And actually moving teams into this and being very flexible to do it is absolutely brilliant. So we did a lot of work this year. We've had COVID marshals come in. We've worked extensively with the police. We've had patrols out looking for businesses that should be closed and we're continuing to trade. We found a lot of businesses that would actually close if they were asked to, but they wouldn't do it on just what was being put through the government and through the websites. We were handing out lots of advice, trying to help people trade from home, trying to help people trade on the internet, or indeed doing deliveries when people thought they would have to close and stay closed. There were lots of inspections done. As I said, there was money that was brought in from government to increase enforcement and compliance, and we used that extensively. £899,000 worth of money was invested, and we invested that in all aspects across the board, which are reported on in the previous committee. The COVID marshals did a fantastic job of actually being out there on the streets, talking to people. The one that I think we made a really big difference on the copy was the handing out of face coverings, especially around the sort of January New Year's sales, when we were trying to break that second spike in COVID. And literally thousands of masks, 30,000 masks went out in a very, very short period of time. And government again supported us with that, because initially we were going to buy those. But they said, no, that's so fantastic, pack the masks and let's give them out and report back on the impact. So that was brilliant. In amongst doing all that work and doing the visits and trying to make sure people were safe, we did have business as usual going on. In some areas it actually increased, so people were at home, so they were noticing problems. They had noisy neighbours that maybe they were at work when they were normally playing music, and now all of a sudden they're at home and the music's going. So we had lots of requests for assistance. At one point, I think in a period of 2 months in the spring, we had more bonfire complaints than we had in the preceding 2 years. Just people cleaning the gardens, having that spare time and working. And again, we worked very hard to sort of smooth out relationships between neighbours in certain areas where it was required. As I said, the food inspections as a whole had stopped, and we will bring a report very shortly on the food restart programme. But the food inspections had stopped, but we were still required to do high-risk premises, and high-risk could be premises which are either very poor in performance or because they do something which is high risk. So a hospital automatically becomes high risk premises. Somebody just cook, chill, cook, freeze, they would be high risk. And we continue to try and support them throughout the pandemic and carried out inspections. Equally, we still have food complaints to deal with, and we also have premises where people were alleging that the premises were filthy and dirty, and again, we were attending those. Health and safety continued. There was a couple of big cases that concluded. View Entertainment concluded, which was a fatality, and again, I'll do a report on that. We'll do a briefing session on that. But health and safety still continued. People still fortunately involved in incidents, and if they take severe injury or death, then we still have to investigate those, and they're still ongoing. The Environmental Protection Unit was really busy around the noise sort of side, putting out the acoustic tapes and things, and we had an interesting development in that we had to double the number of recorders that we were using, so we could put some away for a week and a half, so that there was no risks of transferring COVID amongst households. The difficulty we have is it's great having 7 pieces of kit recording for an hour, but that gives you 7 hours worth that you've got to record. If you give out 14 pieces, there's 14 hours of recording that you have to do. So we did use some of the monies that we were given to improve the service, because we found it very difficult to go into people's properties to address the noise levels. But that they did manage to get that up and running and working well from July onwards, when I was really pleased with the efforts they made on that. Air quality, we still continue doing air monitoring around the city and reporting onto the real-time reports that are on the web about air quality in Birmingham. But in addition to that, we've also done some work around the CAS and the clean air zone to ensure that we have some sort of background readings and we can actually show what the difference is following the declaration of the CAS. Unfortunately, again, because of COVID, the movement of vehicles has significantly changed in that period, but we'll do our best to report on that. We still work a little bit on contaminated land, but there's not too much work going forward on that. We know it's there, and there is a consultation out at the moment as to whether that should restart, and we are reporting back to the Environment Agency on that. The pollution inspections have ceased. but we are restarting that. These are premises that are licensed to pollute, and we have to make sure that they're using the best available technology to ensure that the emissions to the air are as minimal as we can. The Commonwealth Games work is stepping up as we move away from COVID enforcement, and we'll carry on doing that work. The officers who are involved in unauthorised encampments did a fantastic job this year. What we did is we used the transit sites that we've got on Proctor Street as a stopping place where people could actually come and stop. Evictions ceased, so we weren't evicting people for overstaying, but we were protecting the parks by using the transit site, and that's worked really well. Unfortunately, it was so heavily used, it's closed at the moment for repair. Animal welfare continues to be busy. They found it difficult to do their licensing inspections, but we did continue to do some of them. Some of them were real-time ones with people wandering around with their phones, so they could actually show how they're treating their animals. And now they're just going to do their catch-up very rapidly. They move the courts up. And then there's some details about some of the high-profile cases that they've done on page 15. The other thing that we look at pest control, and I have to say we had to put on the temporary mortuary. The pest officers were absolutely brilliant, because initially we stopped doing home visits, but then they transferred over to cemeteries, and some of them were involved in grave digging and other works just to keep the services going. So the officers there did an absolutely fantastic job. And then very rapidly, as we found more complaints were coming about rats as we went through the springtime, we started utilising a lot of the kit that they have for the chemical sprays, which are very high standards, to enable them to continue delivering their service. And there was no downturn in the number of treatments. In fact, it's 1,000 higher than the preceding year. So they were very busy. And then there's a canter through there for the other portion of the work that I'm responsible for, which is the mortuary service. So we've got some information there about the coroners and the mortuary. Again, the staff in the mortuary are absolutely fantastic. They supported not only the work that we normally do at Newton Street, but they also supported the 2 temporary mortuaries that we had at Birmingham Court and I think it's Sutton Coalfield. And I'm really, really grateful to them, not only the ones that stayed and went out to those temporary mortuaries, but also the ones that then had to pick up the extra work within the main mortuary. They too had a lot of pressure on them, because obviously they weren't aware necessarily of the bodies that were coming in were COVID positive, so they also had to put on extra layers of PPE, and that also caused quite a lot of physical stress in the work that they were doing. So again, I just want to report my thanks to those officers as well, because it was hard work through the staff and through the chair. I've answered through on the numbers there. If anybody wants to ask questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Meet there. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank all the officers who compiled this report. I'd particularly like to pay thanks to all officers who've done their bit to ensure unauthorised encampments have been moved on as swiftly as possible within the confines of the law. Recently, we have had a spate of unauthorised encampments recently. I had one in my ward where they smashed through the fence, and they were there for 6 days before they were moved on. They left a terrible mess, and then I believe they moved to your ward, Chair, 3 locations. I would like to ask if we could possibly have a more full and detailed report like we used to on licensing, just so we know where we stand with the current situation on authorised encampments. I think that would be worthwhile doing. I know there's been a number of updates, both locally and nationally, recently. I know the government's changing the law with the police crime and sentencing bill to tighten up the situation with unauthorised encampments, but I think there's more that could possibly be done locally, and perhaps we can look into that as well.
Yes, we can bring something to the next meeting, and obviously, given my ward, has encountered the issue on more than one occasion. I'm very keen that we do keep members informed. I mean, I think the situation changed because of the problems with the 2 sites which we have, and that was not down to the council, it was down to users. And I understand, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, that once the sites are back in full use, then this will restore the legal position in terms of our powers to deal more speedily with unauthorised encampments. Obviously, we do rest very much on the cooperation of the police, though, in this situation, and that's the complication. I have to say that I'm not sure the legal changes that are proposed are going to help. And it's interesting that the police have actually, in terms of the national body, have come out against them because they don't really see them as changing the actual conditions on the ground. And like every member around the table, I'm looking for practical solutions because I don't think people should be allowed to come and trash our parks, which is what I'm afraid too often happens. And I'm very much against that, obviously, as everybody is. But we have to find some way of accommodating, what has been a historic lifestyle in a way that causes minimal problems to society. And I don't think we've ever grasped that nettle as a country nationally, really, not from me. Anyway, we'll certainly bring something more to the next meeting. I think that's the proposal, isn't it? Yes, so you'll have a bigger picture, and by then I think some of the issues on the ground will be clarified in terms of the sites. Councillor Locke?
I'd like to endorse what Councillor Hick says about the thanks to Bill and Dave, because they are the current company travellers across the way. They've been in Councillor Levy's ward, and also they're in Councillor Straker Wells and Councillor Jenkins' ward, and they have been in my ward, and I know that Bill and Dave have been remarkable and worked really hard, and I'd just like to thank them for what they're doing, and the whole team as well, and especially mentioning the work in environmental health. They've done an awful lot of work in my ward, and my thanks to all the team there.
Thank you, Councillor Locke. Councillor Liddy?
Thank you, Chair. In Mr. Oxford's report, he refers to the past tense for the COVID-19 marshals. Have they now, has their contract finished, or are they still around?
Chair 7, I think.
Chair, the COVID marshals are still in place. The Director of Public Health has asked us to keep an available response up until March the 31st. So he's funding those officers until March the 31st. As we have some organic change, we're not replacing as quickly, but as there's a demand, we will continue to have them there. At the moment, we're also supporting the COVID testing sites with some of the marshals. So they are around, but a lot of the legislation has gone. But if there's any high profile events, anything that we can assist there, then we offer some assistance there. And then they're also trying to do anything and everything they can to help some of the backlogs. So yeah, we're trying to use them as flexibly as we can, but no, definitely until the 31st of March, we've got funding. And then potentially, obviously, there's next year COVID, there's potentially the games COVID. So there's no plans at the moment for an automatic service. I'm just saying that's where the funding is at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
And you've got a very useful chart on page 6, which gives the headline figures basically around the activities. And a total spend of £889,000.
Yes, yeah, that's the grant from the government with the £889,000 coming from the compliance grants. The figures on environmental health work are on page 4, and enforcement activities on page 5.
Okay.
As well as the enforcement. But yes, those totals are. I think the split on you. Can I just add, Chair, on the Proctor Street transit site? We are pushing housing to try and get that repaired as soon as possible. Unfortunately, there's an effective drain on there that needs to be relayed, and then there's some repair works. But as soon as we can, we'll get it open. From my point, I think it does demonstrate that the transit site does work in that. Yes, we've got problems on the campus at the moment, but actually we've got a year and a bit with hardly any problems, and nobody talking to me about problems with the wards, but we are now. So again, I'm pushing the planning and housing to deliver the development plan, urban development plan, which has identified the transit site.
Because could you say more about how this is managed? Because housing's role is what? Are they funding this? We fund the site, don't we? Or what's the position on that?
So the sort was brought in an emergency situation in that we were desperate for somewhere because of the money that we were losing on looking after the parks, etc. So application was made by housing. The Parks Division said they would cover any development costs because they were funding about £250,000 worth of clean-up per annum. So the site was then set up. It's been recognised as it's basically a tenancy. Someone wants to come and reside for a period of time in the city. So the right division for it to be within is the housing division, which is now the housing department. And what we've done is basically running on the shoestring, asking the housing to develop some form of management behind it. And I think what we need to do is bring this report with housing as a joint report. So I'll try and endeavour to do that for the next committee. But I'll definitely bring a report on just the housing side. So we need housing to take this on and to manage it. Throughout COVID, because there was no evictions, we were getting people onto the site and it's been well used through this period of time. We've just about got Aston Brook Street ready to operate, and we have directed 2 encampments there, but nobody's chosen to go there. But that's still working, and we've got some I require. We need about 30 pictures of it. That's the sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. So, well, we look forward to the report then, because I think the relationship with housing is key about managing these sites and protecting them and making sure that they're fully available all the year round. Any other questions then, or comments on the report? If not, thank you very much. It's very comprehensive, that section. We've got the illegal money lending team and the training standards regional investigation team. So Tony Quigley.
Chair, yeah, Tony Quigley, head of training standards and the 2 services in the regional investigation team. Chair, I don't propose to go through all the reports. I'll just point out just a couple of points in respect of the illegal money lending team. But first of all, like Mark, I'd like to thank all of the staff and my managers in respect of the performance from last year, because ultimately, like all services, we were in the midst of a pandemic, and clearly, loan sharking, whilst it doesn't go away, we still had to adopt and change and be flexible about the way that we operated in order to ensure that illegal money lenders were brought to justice and that they were stopped in their tracks from continuing to terrorise and target individuals within the communities. The report spells out some of the cases that we've had over the last 12 months. We had the issues, obviously, because the team is a national team hosted by Birmingham City Council, of things, just simple things really, like having somewhere for the team to stay if they were going into different areas. We had the different tiers that were imposed nationally, and we ended up with officers going into high tier areas. I remember, for example, that Oldham at one stage was in complete lockdown, but we had to send a team there because ultimately we had an individual that was terrorising a community in respect of illegal money lending, and the team, obviously with precautions, went and carried out that work to ensure that the intervention was taken care of. So, from my perspective as the head of service, whilst I'm very proud of the team in respect of the work they do, it is their efforts that should be commended, not mine, so to speak. Just a couple of points. The medium borrowing in respect of loans. If we go back a few years, the average loan from loan sharks was about £350. And each loan would be paid back at double. So the average loan and the payments would relate to about £700. If you go to page 32, you can see that the medium loan was about £1,500 to £2,000, but the repaid was £10,000. So that's 5 times what somebody would take. And also in respect of the relationship, you can see that the relationship in loan shark was affected by the COVID pandemic. Either they had to borrow more because of the loss of income, or the lender increased threats over non-payment. So whilst it was continuing in COVID, it also had an impact on the illegal activity that we saw across the country. Youngest victim was 19 that we were dealing with, and the oldest victim was 81. So it just shows you that there is no difference between age, gender, and also the who it affects and the impact it has on people's lives. The clear thing is that the impact is all around the erosion of quality of life. I think that's absolutely key with this, and why we're very glad to be part of the solution to try and make sure that we can try and stop this illegal activity. We've moved away from illegal money lending awards. What we do now is we're recognising partner contribution, and so we now have a partner a recognition scheme, and the report lists a number of recognised partners. More and more partners coming into that scheme, and it means that they will be promoting IMLT, raising awareness in everything that they do. And you can see that some of the partners are significant partners, such as Runcorn Police, East Sussex Credit Union, etc., etc. I don't propose to go through the report in any great length, other than to say clearly the pandemic did have an impact on the number of interventions that we can carry out, but we are trying to get back to our new norm. We're still obviously taking precautions. We're still checking in respect of COVID, etc., as we go across the country. But the team are out carrying out interventions, and also there's a lot of support work that we're doing in the communities to keep the message out there that actually loan sharks are bad. I would say that just one case that I can draw attention to is that of Mabunga. He was one that used an influencer on the web. So it shows that the illegal money lenders are even going into modern day society. It isn't necessarily just somebody with a book that's operating in the community. In many instances, they will be on the internet, they will be in dating sites, they will be across the homes, coming in through our electronic devices and subtly capturing people that way as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Morrell.
Councillor Morrell from Great Park. You mentioned that they're using influencers. I suspect you mean like Instagram models and that kind of stuff. What is the implication for the individuals if an influencer was indicted in this? Is there any rules or regulations that we could use as a deterrent to stop them engaging in this activity?
Yeah, the influencers in essence committing offences as well. It's advertising illegal means. It's a Section 21 offence, I think. So we could take the view that we would implicate those in the proceedings as well. What we generally do, obviously from a proportionality perspective, is we advise and warn the individuals that they can't do this sort of thing, and that they should be checking to make sure that anybody who's offering loans across the internet should be authorised. There's a big piece of work obviously coming out around protections on the internet, and we're hoping that that will also include some of the big search engines, so that we can put a message up that when somebody's checking or somebody's potentially going for a loan from somebody that they've met over the internet, then in essence a warning comes up that people should check to ensure that they're authorised to do what they're doing. So there are things that are coming in the pipeline, if that makes sense. But in this instance, we did warn the influencer that clearly the advertisement was illegal, and if they were doing it again, then they would face the consequences.
Yes, Assistant Director.
Chair, thank you. All Lancaster, I'm not, I think this is the completion of the annual reports that the committee will have for this year. I'm not used to the humility from some of my heads of service, but I have to say that this work would not have happened without their efforts, and they have worked incredibly hard, not only dealing with this, but also we moved offices last October to allow Smithfield site to come forward for the Commonwealth Games, which has involved in us having a much too few desks for the number of people we've got, so we've had to go to a hybrid working situation. I can't say anything other than my personal thanks, but congratulations to them for all they've achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. And it reminds me that we as members, obviously, we see our senior officers here, and we see some of the other officers from time to time, but of course COVID has restricted all that. And the Assistant Director and I have talked about a visit to the offices at some stage for anybody who wants to come, so that we can just say hello, you know, and perhaps have a briefing in situ in the offices. So when conditions allow, we'll revisit that and let everybody know, or councillors obviously who wish to attend. Because I think it's important that, you know, we put names to faces and we understand, you know, what people are coping with. So from the check out what was just said.
Happy to do that, Chair.
Okay. And I mean, there are no other comments generally. Sorry, Councillor.
When that is all right to do that, as you mentioned, I'll bring the biscuits.
Oh, right, very glad to do. Yes, thank you very much for that.
It'll happen soon now, Chair.
That's right, yes, it'll move on now. I was just struck by also under the Trading Standards Regional Investigation Team, there's some really high profile cases there, anti-counterfeit activity, a number of which are, you know, we've seen in the national newspapers. And it just underlines the scope of the work that goes on. Obviously, it's a partnership with national and local government, but it seems to be a very effective partnership, certainly in terms of the results we're seeing here. And it's a fascinating arena. My daughter works in retail, so she sometimes makes these comments to me about counterfeit goods around the Superdry store where she works, and it is something very real at that level, you know, because that's going on. Of course, that is undermining genuine economic activity in a serious way, isn't it? So, you know, well done all those involved in that side of the activity anyway. Okay, so can we note the reports? Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we're on to the Street Traffic Policy 2020, and Sajila Nasir, Head of Licensing, Markets and Registration Services, is here to talk about that. Thank you, Sajila.
Thank you, Chair. This report really reflects back on having a look at what the impact of our new street trading policy 2020 has had on the trading environment in the city. As you're aware, of November it was passed by City Council. We introduced prohibited streets and central streets and 51 parking spaces that weren't designated. We introduced a new fee structure, and policy was implemented from the 1st of April 2021. In the meantime, we also had a judicial review brought by two non-serving non-standing traders. That judicial review was dismissed in its entirety, I'm pleased to say, and that enabled us to proceed with the implementation. There was obviously changes with infrastructure within Birmingham further changed over the last 20 to 30 years, and to ensure we were compliant with various pieces of legislation, particularly making the marketplace open to new applicants. As things have grown up, then we had street traders potentially on locations along common sides, obstructing sidelines, potential public safety issues. And really, as we went forward into the policy, that's what we put first: public safety, prevention of nuisance, and obstruction of the highway. These were the key tenets of the new policy. The policy issues refer to annual indication consents, and we had to design a brief with people with annual consents. As I said, public safety, prevention, crime, public introducing some consumer protections at the heart of the policy. And we introduced a new assessment application renewal process. Within the first implementation policy, we also enabled an appeal process against an adverse decision. In section 6, you'll see how the policy impacted. So to date, so far, we have 54 applications received, 24 applications were approved. And interestingly, of those 24 approved, 17 were approved after a solution was found to an initial refusal, and that shows how we work with traders to adapt their application to a position where we would be able to permit 8 applications to be refused, with no alternative solution being found, 1 application withdrawn, 4 applications ongoing, and we have 5 appeals against an adverse decision, none of which were upheld. Of the 54 applications, 14 were from new traders, and the most common reason for refusal was that the location was not compliant with Whole West legislation, not suitable location for signs, or it was on the street. As we go down, you can see that in November 2020, we had approximately 71 consents prior to the new policy going forward. So we have reduced the number. The greatest reduction in consents has been in the city centre, which has reduced from 15 to 6 consents. It's to a certain extent to be expected because many of those locations and sizes were inappropriate. Only 4 previous city centre applicants, traders made an application. Of those, 3 were approved. We approved 3 brand new traders not known to us. And all traders are now moving trading every day. So that resolves some of the issues we had with graffiti and the closed street trade union acting as well, the rest of the retail premises were open and that was closed. So that wasn't ideal in the retail shopping environment that goes on way past 8 p.m. So as you can see, this is the impact that the policies have. We believe it to be a success. That we have enhanced the trading environment on the street and complemented fixed retail businesses and used a consistent methodology that involved police, highways colleagues, transportation colleagues in looking at application and having a fair and robust response in determining that application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Going into looking to 6.2, the data that we've had so far, I appreciate that these are probably very conservative because we've only just come out of lockdown and we'll probably expect these to grow over time. The Conservative group, obviously, we had reservations about this because we thought it might stifle innovation, in particular new traders in competition within the marketplace. It's encouraging to see, though, that 17 applications were approved after a solution was found. So that shows us that the licensing department are actually working with traders to actually try and find a solution, rather than just say, computer says no. It doesn't say, though, it says if 14 of the traders were new traders, it doesn't say how many of those approved were new traders. So could you just tell us how many of those 14 were approved and how many were disapproved?
Chair, unfortunately, I can't at the moment because I can't access the Excel spreadsheet that I need for that, but I can certainly come back to you, Councillor Moran.
Do you have a ballpark figure or an estimate?
I would actually suggest that most of them were approved. The greatest area of disapproval, refusal, was in the city centre because of the specific locations that people wanted within very, very busy pedestrian thoroughfares. But I would say at least 2/3 of those were approved.
Okay. Chair, and just to add a comment there, if members recall, because there have been no changes to street traders for many, many years. That was one of the prime aims of the new policy, which actually was to encourage new traders rather than perpetuate the same traders always getting that and the traders not being representative of our communities. So we're pleasantly surprised by that number coming through, but what we can do is we can ensure that it's incorporated in the minutes, that we've got the number there, we've put the addendum there for the Louisa to include, so it's in the minutes.
Or, I mean,
And
if
that
you,
will-
if you could provide that information, it's just a useful, point that Councillor Morrell makes about, you know, how many incoming are new and so on. But yes, and I think, again, Councillor Morrell's point is that we're probably not there yet because of the impact of COVID. It'd be interesting to see how this develops, but it seems to be a success story. And again, I applaud the fact that the department are working with applicants, because we want to see more good street trading, you know, not business closing it down in any way. So thank you very much for those comments and questions. Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Higgs.
Yeah, just a quick question. Thank you, Chair. You might not be able to look at this now, Julia, if you haven't got access to your spreadsheet, but of the 8 that were reviewed with no alternative solution being found, with all of these new people coming to the market, or were any of them existing traders at all? Do you have those figures to hand now?
I know at least 2 of the 8 were existing traders, and others were in situations where, for instance, they applied to go some, 3 of the 8 were refusals actually, 4. They applied to go places where there was a traffic regulation order, etc. And we couldn't manage to find a suitable location within the vicinity where they could trade. So predominantly the reason for refusal was highways issues.
But do we know if they were new applicants?
As I said, I think 4 applications. I do know it's 4 applications, because one trade had 2. 4 applications were from previous street traders, which were refused. Of the other 4, I don't know. Okay.
Right.
Perhaps, Chair, what we can do is, in the future, the questions that are being asked, we'll include within our activity report. So if anything changes, we can actually give you that, so you've got that as a regular.
Yeah.
There's that interest.
Yeah, I think we're particularly interested in seeing new entrants to the market, really, because that shows that it's vibrant and it's growing. So thank you for that. So we'll get that information in the future. Okay, thank you for those questions. So on that basis, can we approve the report? Thank you. So we're on to annual safety at sports grounds. Assistant Director.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is the annual report for 2020-2021, covering all the work in relation to the Safety at Sports Grounds Act and the designated stadia and designated stands. So just to give an indication to members to recall, this was a change that came in the 2019 in terms of the policy, which then moved forward into the annual meeting 2020, which I think was held in April, wasn't it, as a side there. The nature of it is that we've separated out the role, if you like, of the SAGs and the regulators much more succinctly. The regulatory role was not held within regulation enforcement. It is now, and this report is designed to actually show you what's been happening with the 3 designated stadia. We're obviously, it's difficult to go through into certain information, but if there are questions that members wish to ask, which have become a confidential issue, then I would suggest we move that part of it back to the back of the agenda and we go into confidential session. And that's going further on paragraph 3.5, which I think is a current live issue that that's why Mr. Croxall has left the meeting, because he's going to a meeting on that as we speak. But generally, we found we're building up a good working relationship with each of the scheduled stadia, the designated stadia, and we've had particular issues around, as I say, one of them. The other 2 stands that are regulated, which at Moseley Rugby Club and Perry Bar Speedway, we're updating those as we speak as well, so they're being dealt with. And in future, just to let members know, obviously, that the Alexander Stadium which has currently a regulated stand, will become a scheduled stadium in a designated stadium as from April next year, when it's due to be completed in time for the Olympics Games. And again, we're involved in the licensing side to it. You've got an overview of the work in relation to the SAGs, and you've got a line of future activity. Happy to take any questions, Chair, or points, but as I say, with regards to one of them, if it goes into a confidential area, I think we will need to go into confidential session, possibly the ease of the meeting at the end of the meeting.
Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I have a question about St Andrews. So apologies if it's something that you can't do.
If you want to ask the question, if I can do, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'll say yes.
Yeah, so I have a vested interest in this as a season ticket holder who hasn't actually been able to go yet. And there are a couple of questions on it. So I understand it was closed after a sort of annual inspection, or rather two of the stands were closed after an annual inspection. I was just wondering, from what we kind of hear around the grapevine from supporters groups and trusts, etc., was that it was quite a big body of work. So I'm kind of wondering to what extent, was that much worse this year than it has been in previous years, particularly as no one's been there for the last 12 months. And secondly, can you shed any light on when these issues will be resolved? As the club yesterday issued a statement saying that they are hoping to open one of the stands in a little over 48 hours. So I don't know if you know that the council's got another inspection planned.
Chair, can we revert that till the end of the meeting? I think.
Yes, we'll go into private session because they're relevant points, and but we can't discuss the sensitive issues in the public session, so we'll reserve that to a private session.
Chair, can I just say that we'll record that as a non-pecuniary interest effectively as well for safety and minutes.
Yes, so we'll put that down as you have declared an interest in.
Don't have to declare an interest if you're a supporter of the Blues. That's I'm not going to say that.
So there we are. Okay, so we will return to that. More generally, one point that came up when we were discussing this as members was it'd be good to have on any report in future who is actually sitting on the elected member who's sitting on the different sections. It just indicates who we might speak to if we had a particular point we wanted to raise informally with them.
Chair, happy to get a note round to members to actually do that.
Yeah, that would be useful. Then in future, when we have this report, which is an annual report, isn't it? Basically, yes. We just have the names there as well. Anything else that we can discuss in the public section that people want to raise, or generic points? As I say, we will go into a private session to pick up the points, more sensitive points.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report, as you would expect, because we do have a duty as a whole committee, not just for St Andrews, but for the other two venues, Edgbaston Cricket Ground, as well as that heavenly place in Aston. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure we'll minute that in its entirety. Thank you very much.
Just a dignity.
Okay.
Chair, can I just remind members of code of conduct? I don't want to see any physical violence.
Okay, very timely reminder. Okay, well, if we can note the report now in the public session, we'll go back into a private session. I have to ask the committee clerk to remind me of the formal words.
I've got the words.
Oh, well, that's fine. So we can refer to
that. It will be due to commercial sensitivity.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll read those out at the appropriate time. So we will return to that point. So can we note that report? Thank you. Agreed. Thank you very much. So now, next report is the regulation enforcement activity report. As you know, this is the details of prosecutions and other enforcement activity, which doesn't require much comment from us. It's whether you have any questions or issues you want to raise. That's number 10. Sorry. Yes, I've gone to the wrong one. Sorry. It's the
Chair, I think just a bit that helps. So this is now the routine report that the committee receives. It shows the first quarter's activity in relation to each of the services in regulation enforcement. I think it's I think it's clear to see that we're still getting an enormous amount of activity. Probably it's increased in certain areas than we would have expected. Licensing obviously couldn't do some of their work during the pandemic, but they're now picking up that activity because we're now, as the restrictions have been withdrawn nationally, then of course several of the businesses are coming to the fore. We're just happy to take any particular questions there might be. I will just make one mention on death registrations. If you took out last year, although it's reduced quite significantly last year, we are actually seeing a slightly raised level of death registration based on previous years to that. But it's just something that we keep our eye on a regular basis to look at what's happening. I think apart from that, Chair, it is a fairly routine report. Prefer to leave members to ask any questions they may have, and we can update members accordingly.
Okay, any questions? I'm pleased to note that the reference to food hygiene on page 4, the proactive food inspections will start again in October.
Yes, Chair, we will bring you our plan to the committee, which actually shows how we're going to meet the Food Standards Agency's requirements, which are coming back in place because we think it's important that the council does endorse that. I know the portfolio holder for the policy side, the leader of the council, is also very keen to ensure that we meet the requirements of that plan.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else?
No, Chair.
If not, can we note the report? No, agreed. Thank you very much. And then 11, again, prosecutions and cautions, all the details of the activity where we had to go to the
Chair, it's a standard report. I mean, some of these events actually are in relation to incidents that happened some while back. So these are some of the catch-up cases. I think each individual case is set out for members so they can see the area of food hygiene offences going through to the littering offences and recorded as where it is, where the person comes from in line with what the members have requested. We are finding now that the activity in the courts is picking up, and we are starting to deal with some of what I would call the more straightforward cases. I think it's fair to say the long-standing cases, the more complex ones, we are getting court dates approaching 2022 through 2023 in some areas. So there is a long catch-up in relation to some of the prosecutions. And then you've got all the individual service cases. It doesn't include the counterfeiting one that I know has been heavily in the press recently, but must be seen as one of the best results the City Council's had in a long while in terms of the 4-year imprisonment of a counterfeiter. Because that will become even more important when we come through to the Commonwealth Games, where there's a whole new legislation coming in for the Commonwealth Games, particularly around protection. It is quite a big area. Chair, I think that the activities show that it's still ongoing. We prefer people to comply with the law and not actually have to resort to prosecution and enforcement. But it's a continuing issue for us. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other points? Any questions? Yes, Councillor Morrell.
Yeah, Commissioner's backlog. Are we taking any measures to address that?
We have to issue our summonses within certain time, but some offences are requiring within 6 months or a year of the offence, others have a longer term. We are continuing to issue summonses. It's just what happens when it gets to the magistrates' court and they are pushing it back. What we do is make representations. It's really important we get these dealt with, because to some degree it's unfair on the business hanging over on them as well. But I think that's all we really can do, is actually make representations to the court, see what we can do to promote the need for the action to be quick, and the information then made available to the public in terms of the relevant premises that are causing concern. There's not much more we can do.
So it's out of your hands, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, obviously any follow-up you want to pursue outside the meeting, please contact the officers in the usual way to get more information. But can we accept the report? Agree. Okay,
Stephen, thank you. 12 Chair's Authority report is the usual report around where I'm consulted on, and this is all in this case, to do with taxi licensing and removal in extreme circumstances of licenses, just because of complaints and so on. Can we note the report? No, great, thank you. I haven't forgotten the private session, actually. We'll get to the, at the end, we'll read out and say the words. Sorry. It's all right. I have no other urgent business. So moving on to item 14, I move that in an urgent situation between. Oh, yes, sorry.
Can I just raise a question?
Yes.
Because I don't know if this comes under, I'm going to ask it anyway. There's more and more people now burning the traffic lights. I don't know if this comes under, if you don't, tell me to shut up. Now begging or whatever you wish to call it. And becoming a real hazard, not just to themselves, but to other people. And I just think under public protection, can we look into this? Because eventually somebody's going to get hurt. I mean, being one of somebody in a car or on a vehicle, or being one of the people trying to get money to survive. But I think it's just some of the, these looking into quickly if we can.
That's the director.
Chair, thank you. It is something that we are carrying out work with colleagues in the police and in the community safety team. And I know Councillor Cotton is particularly interested in what's happening. It will require us to seek to get a public service protection or a PSPO in order to try and deal with it. It's very, very difficult to get the evidence that, and you can either injunct named individuals. We can't seem to get that evidence. It's really difficult, but we're recognising it's a major issue. I think in one way the Commonwealth Games coming up next year will help to precipitate action, because I think it's something that needs to be done for the city as a whole anyway. But I think Councillor Sharp is absolutely correct. It is becoming a scourge that is causing major issues. We are doing what we can. It's quite an involved process to get that PSPA.
Chair, come on.
Yep.
I understand the Commonwealth Games are coming. But the way that comes across as though it's if the Commonwealth Games wasn't coming, we wouldn't be so concerned.
Chair, we were dealing with it even before they.
I just think it's someone that needs, I know John Cotton's looking at it, but I don't think they can wait that long for a report to come, because as I say, somebody will get seriously injured something, and it will be on the front of the mail, and the city will get slaughtered.
Chair, we'll bring back a report.
Yeah, and I'll take up the matter with John Cotton, Councillor Sharp, because it is a matter of concern. And I've seen it myself, it does worry me that, are people being trafficked, or is there some gang activity, there are big issues there, which are police issues, aren't they? Which would all concern us. So I will have a conversation with the cabinet member around.
Well, the only reason I raise this rapidly is because there was a young lad the other night doing it on the Tyburn Road, and he got a young child with him.
Yeah, I mean, which
is an extremely dangerous.
It's so worrying when you see that, isn't it? Yeah. I think we're all concerned. I get it. And what I need to do is the assistant director will follow it up in terms of information, but I'll have a word with Councillor Cotton just to, so we can find out what's going on. But I'm sure he's on that particular case.
Chair, if any members do come across situations like that where they're concerned and where there's a potential safeguarding issue, then please just let me know, and I will try and get the right part of the council involved in it to actually deal with it. But it's getting that information, getting it right, knowing the time, the date, and then we can actually start to build up that evidence.
If I can, Chair, I mean, in support of Councillor Sharp's comment, I mean, at the Belgrade Bristol Road junction, was it Monday? There was a shift change.
Yeah.
Where they all greeted each other, and those that had been there moved off for the second shift to move in. Now, this is obviously organised, and I do mean properly organised, because there were several of them there just as I pulled up. whilst they moved off, another group actively replacing them. Now, can I remind you, Chair, that this or last week, the council announced and had been publicising there's a better way to donate rather than just give it to those on the street. And I would encourage everyone to look at there's a better way to donate in their donations rather than giving it to those begging on the street, who are only feeding the habits of drug users, who in turn are victims of criminal gangs.
Exploited.
Yeah.
That is the worry, certainly, isn't it? That, you know, there's a mesh, a criminal mesh here, and you know, people are being used. But anyway, okay, let the assistant director take that back, and as I said, I'll take it back and have a conversation with Councillor Cotton, just so we know what's happening. But I do take the point very seriously, and you know, I'm with you. I'd like to see firm action on this from the relevant authorities. Okay, thank you for that. So can we agree the authority to chair and officers? Agreed. So now can I read the move into private session, and that will end and after this will close the public session, and obviously the broadcast will go on. That in view of the nature of the business to be transacted, which includes exempt information of the category indicated, the public will be now excluded from the meeting under exempt paragraph 3. Is that correct?
Yes, can we wait to start?
Yes. Okay, so we're now at the next.